Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start with a number that should genuinely shock you. We are spending approximately 2,500 hours a year on our phones.
2,500.
That is 104 solid days. I mean, that's more than 3 months of the entire year just staring at a piece of glass.
And that's just the average. I mean, for some people, like Gen Z, they're clocking 3 hours and 18 minutes on social media alone every single day.
Wow.
In the US, our general daily screen time across all platforms is already past 4 hours. It's a complete colonization of our waking life.
But it's an engineered problem, isn't it? Every scroll, every notification, it's all designed with this like surgical precision to trap your attention.
Absolutely.
So the mission for this deep dive is clear for you, the person listening, the person trying to figure this all out. In 2026, where this is just the default, what actually happens to your body and your mind if you just stop?
Right. We've broken down all the source material to reveal the immediate shock, the medium-term recovery, and then the really profound long-term potential of a digital detox. It's basically a roadmap for reclaiming your focus.
Let's jump right into that immediate fallout then, the first 24 hours. The struggle, it feels like withdrawal. And it's not just, breaking a bad habit. It's a real neurochemical shock to the system.
Absolutely. To understand that immediate pain and irritability, you really have to understand the dopamine economy.
Okay.
We often misuse the term dopamine, right? We think it's about pleasure, but it's actually the primary chemical engine for motivation and anticipation. It's what drives us to seek things out.
So it's less about enjoying the reward and more about that neurological voice that says, go get that thing you think you want.
Precisely. The moment you refresh a feed or hear a notification chime or get a new like.
That little ping.
That little ping, dopamine spikes in your brain's reward circuit. And that instant release, it powerfully reinforces the action. It trains your brain that checking your phone is the fastest way to get that little hit of novelty.
So when you suddenly stop, that whole reward loop just snaps.
It snaps. And your brain cries out for the stimulation it was expecting.
And that craving, it's almost physical, isn't it? Like a digital phantom limb syndrome where your body just expects something to be there that isn't.
We see that manifested in conditions like nomophobia. That's the fear or anxiety of being without your phone. But something even more common that almost everyone experiences is phantom vibration syndrome, or PVS.
Anxiety, yeah, I've heard that. You feel buzz in your pocket, but nothing's there.
Exactly. You feel the buzz, you hear the ring, even when the phone is silent or not even on you. PVS it's practically a badge of modern life. It just shows how deeply we've integrated the device into our physical expectations.
I used to think PVS was just a quirky habit. But if it's a signal of reliance, what does it really tell us about the state of our mental health?
Well, it indicates very high levels of stress and reliance. It's your nervous system basically writing the expectation of connection into your physical reality.
Wow.
And what's really fascinating is this social paradox the research highlights. In studies with high-stress groups, like medical students, they found that 100% of the subjects showed symptoms of nomophobia.
100%.
100%. So if everyone is exhibiting symptoms of a so-called fear, it challenges the very idea of it being a disease, right? Are we saying modern life is inherently pathological, or do we need a whole new definition of normal?
That's a chilling thought. If just trying to stop the behavior causes measurable anxiety and distress, which is the clinical definition of withdrawal, we're dealing with something much more powerful than most people want to admit.
That anxiety is a sign you're fighting the brain's deeply ingrained expectation of a reward. But the fight is worth it.
Okay, so you've survived the agony in the first 24 hours. The good news starts to arrive. The body finally begins to exhale as we move into part 2, the first week. What's the first really measurable sign of recovery?
It's rest. I mean, that initial spike of irritability can be intense, but after a few days, the benefits to your physical rest are just profound. You're removing that constant low-grade physiological arousal.
That feeling of always waiting for a buzz.
Exactly. The compulsion to check the feed, it's gone.
And we all know about blue light and how it disrupts melatonin, but removing the device from the bedroom, it does more than that, right?
Oh, much more. Research shows that PVS and general high stress are positively correlated with clinical sleep disorders. We're talking insomnia, even sleep apnea.
Really? Sleep apnea.
By removing the device and that whole behavioral loop of checking it, You allow the brain to genuinely settle down and prepare for sleep properly. This leads to much deeper, higher quality rest. It's why organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics are always emphasizing simple, tech-free routines, especially around meals and bedtime.
And once the body starts resting deeper, I imagine the cognitive benefits follow pretty fast. That feeling of reclaiming your focus must feel transformative.
It does. That feeling is rooted in eliminating something called attentional residue.
Okay, break that down for us.
Think of your working memory like your computer's RAM, it's temporary storage. Every time you switch tasks, you jump from a document to an email to a social media alert, you don't fully close the mental tab on the last thing.
You leave a little bit behind.
You leave cognitive baggage or residue, which keeps consuming precious mental resources in the background.
So we're constantly carrying these mental remnants from every single interruption. And the smartphone is basically an interruption factory.
Exactly. This constant context switching fragments your focus, it drastically reduces your working memory, and it increases cognitive fatigue. When you eliminate the smartphone, you stop the source of the fragmentation. Your native attention span starts to knit itself back together.
What's actually happening in the physical structure of the brain during this detox week? You mentioned it weakens communication lines.
Right. So research using fMRI shows reduced functional connectivity in the parts of the brain responsible for sustained focus and impulse control. These are often called the salience and central executive networks.
Those are heavy terms. For someone listening, what does the central executive network actually do for us in daily life?
Think of it as your brain's CEO. It manages planning, complex decisions, and, crucially, inhibiting impulsive behavior. It's your internal filter.
Your priority manager.
Your priority manager, exactly. When that network is constantly taxed by this rapid-fire novelty, deep effort feels, well, it feels dull or boring or just too hard. The good news is, cutting out the device allows the brain's CEO to start restoring its function. It makes challenging, meaningful work feel less exhausting and more attainable again.
So by lowering the baseline for stimulation, we stop craving that novelty and make deep focus feel normal again. That's a huge shift. And that brings us to part 3. The first month, we've gone from surviving withdrawal to optimizing our cognition. Now we look at the power of the time we get back. We started with 2,500 hours a year.
And if you just look at that number and you reclaim those hours, even in the first month, you have this massive window for intentional use. People immediately jump to that cultural shorthand for expertise, the 10,000-hour rule.
Right. If I have 2,500 hours free this year, I'm a quarter of the way to mastering a new skill.
And that's where that popular idea needs a bit of clarification. Malcolm Gladwell did an amazing job popularizing it, but the original research it was based on got a bit oversimplified. For true world-class expertise like, say, a top-tier concert pianist, the real number might be closer to 25,000 hours.
So if 10,000 hours is already an optimistic goal, chasing it might just discourage someone who's trying to learn something new.
Absolutely. The key takeaway from that research isn't really the number of hours, it's the quality of the time. The 10,000-hour rule often fails to account for deliberate, intentional practice. Meaning you're focusing relentlessly on technique, constantly seeking immediate feedback, and working right at the very edge of your current ability.
Okay, so if mastery is 10,000 plus hours, what does the research say about just achieving competence? Being good enough to effectively use a skill.
That's where the concept of rapid skill acquisition comes in. Competence, being good enough to be productive, can be achieved in as little as 20 hours of concentrated, intentional practice.
20 hours. That's a completely different mental model than 10,000. Let's make that tangible. What does that kind of time translate to in the real world?
Well, we can look at professional training. To reach professional working proficiency in a language like Spanish or French, the Foreign Service Institute estimates it takes between 600 to 750 classroom hours. Becoming a fully licensed airline pilot requires 1,500 flight hours, and a full mastery trade, like a plumbing apprenticeship, that requires 10,000 on-the-job training hours.
So even if you commit just one intentionally focused hour a day from that reclaimed digital time, you're making real, measurable progress toward a professional level skill, not just dabbling in a hobby. And all the while, your brain is still changing its fundamental structure.
Yes, the long-term cognitive change is inspiring because your brain is literally reshaping itself like clay. That process is called neural plasticity. And while younger learners have an edge, adults can leverage similar mechanisms by establishing really strong, intentional routines.
how do those routines physically help the brain reboot long-term?
Every time you consistently repeat a high-value routine like practicing a skill or focusing on a complex task, you strengthen the neural pathways in your prefrontal cortex.
The CEO part of the brain.
The CEO, the part that manages decision-making and impulse control. You are literally reducing impulsivity by constantly reinforcing the pathways of focus. The right choice starts to feel more automatic over time.
So you move past fighting the urge to check the phone, and you start reinforcing the mental muscle that makes the focused choice the default choice.
Exactly. And the most durable change comes from shifting your core identity, not just setting rigid goals. Don't focus on the negative, like I will only check social media for 30 minutes.
Right.
Instead, adopt a positive identity. I am a person who values deep focus and meaningful offline engagement. Your actions just flow naturally from that new identity.
That brings us to our final synthesis. We've gone from phantom symptoms and anxiety in day 1 to restored attention, deeper sleep, and this ability to rapidly acquire new skills in just a month. So what's the strategy for maintaining this hard-won focus?
The primary strategy for maintenance is something called habit stacking. It recognizes that just relying on willpower, it's a recipe for failure. Willpower is finite.
But is habit stacking just clever discipline? Doesn't it still require a huge amount of willpower to even start that first new habit, to break the old digital chain?
It requires a strategic placement of effort, not massive, sustained willpower. You're anchoring a new high-value behavior onto an existing, stable, automatic routine.
Okay, so how does that work?
The formula is simple. After I do my current automatic habit, I will do my new intentional behavior. You're piggybacking on the stability of something you already do without thinking.
Give us some practical examples for this newly detoxed lifestyle.
Sure. So instead of immediately grabbing your phone when your alarm goes off, you stack. After I turn off my alarm, I will immediately read 5 pages of a book before I even stand up.
I like that, a buffer.
It's a buffer. Or for midday distraction at work. After I finish a Zoom meeting, I will stand up and stretch for 60 seconds before checking my notifications. It creates this mandatory high-value pause between the old stimulus and the potential distraction.
Ultimately, this deep dive really shows us that attention is the most valuable currency in the digital economy. The platforms know it, and they engineer distraction to steal it from us.
It's the ultimate reckoning, really. You have to ask, what is the emotional and functional cost of outsourcing your motivation and your self-worth to external validation, to algorithms and fleeting digital notifications?
The power, as we've seen, lies in the intentional allocation of your focus. If you know that 2,500 hours a year are just sitting there waiting for you to claim them, how will you ensure your focus, that most precious restored commodity, is purposefully allocated toward meaningful work, skill growth, and building a life that you genuinely fully own? That is the challenge we leave you with today.